Corporate social responsibility. In recent years, the concerns about corporate social responsibility in all kinds of companies and organizations have been continuously increasing, resulting in a significant change in the traditional business model whose sole objective was economic enrichment. Currently, we see that not only are the benefits of a material nature of interest, but also society's perceptions and trust in these companies and organizations, that is, their image and their corporate reputation. It's important to underline that this image, if maintained, improved, will eventually turn into a benefit of an economic nature. In order to have a good corporate image and maintain it over time, a company should carry out an exhaustive CSR program that has to take into consideration everybody, that is, the actions carried out should be targeted at all groups, both internally and externally, that might be legitimately affected by their activities. Thus, we agree that a company will not only satisfy its internal audiences, especially its shareholders and its senior management, but will have to go further and satisfy external audiences that, apart from clients and suppliers, may be local organizations, NGOs, and media, and among others. However, the implementation of these programs is not easy, since it requires a whole phase of research and knowledge about a company, establishing what we are and what we want to be, as well as about all the groups of interest, knowing where we want to go and what we want to achieve, as well as what others expect from us and what their interests and concerns are, will help us to successfully define the CSR program and to activities to be carried out. Throughout the entire process, the research and development, implementation, as well as the subsequent analysis and evaluations, which will lead to the implementation of a follow-up program, the aspect of communication should not be put aside. If communication is neglected, we will be unable to carry out actions and activities in line with our audiences. It is of primary importance to establish an ongoing dialogue, since that was what will allow us, as we have said, to get to know what they expect of us, but also to know their opinion regarding the CSR actions undertaken in order to improve them. They do not live up to those expectations. It's important to underline that the actions and activities that a company organization will carry out in order to improve its image will be directed towards different areas of concern, taking into account aspects such as human rights, labor rights, and environmental rights. Thus, and depending on what our public expects of us, our actions will be in line with these rights. In this manual, we will study in depth the corporate social responsibility from its definition in history and its audiences, areas, and communicative system to the study of the legal part regarding the compliance with human, labor, and environmental rights and certifications and standards. In addition, there is an appendix at the end of the manual in which the real case of CSR programming are represented, so that you can get to better understand what CSR from a real and practical point of view. Module 1. The definition of corporate social responsibility currently has a relatively new phenomenon that revolves around the evolution of social interests. There is no agreed definition of CSR. It's important to know that some of the relevant definitions of this term made by several public and private organizations. So let us start with the AECA, defines it in the following manner. That it's voluntary commitment of companies to the development of society and the preservation of the environment from its social composition and responsible behavior towards people and social groups they interact with. And it focuses on the attention on satisfying the needs of stakeholders through certain strategies whose results have to be measured, verified, and adequately communicated. Its objective goes beyond the mere fulfillment of the established legal regulations and obtaining exclusively economic results in the short term. It in turn means a strategic approach that affects decision-making and operations in the entire organization, creating long-term value and significantly contributing to obtaining a lasting competitive advantage. The Green Paper of the European Union defines corporate social responsibility as companies' voluntary integration of social and environmental concerns in their business operations and their relations with their interlocutors. In addition, it establishes the following objectives of this new European global strategy: having the most competitive and dynamic economy of the world based on knowledge, being capable of achieving sustainable economic growth, more and better jobs, greater social cohesion. The World Business Council for Sustainable Development defines corporate social responsibility as a continuing commitment by businesses to behave ethically and contribute to economic development while improving the quality of life of the workforce and their families, as well as the local community and society as large. Corporate social responsibility of Europe also defines it as the expression of the company's commitment towards society and the acceptance of the role in it. This includes a full compliance with the laws and additional actions to ensure that a company does not knowingly operate to the detriment of society. To be in effect and visible, this commitment must be supported by resources, leadership, and must be measurable and measured. The NGO Economists Without Borders defines social responsibility as the recognition and integration of management and operations, the organization of social, labor, environmental, and human rights concerns that generate policy, strategies, and procedures that meet these concerns and shape their relationship with their interlocutors. Taking these 5 definitions, we can establish that CSR requires going beyond the law, regulatory, and conventional obligations and voluntarily making commitments. It is a way of business management based on the management of the impact generated by the activity of clients, employees, shareholders, environment, and society in general that results from a balance between economic growth, social welfare, and the usual use of natural resources and the environment. The balance between business and society is vital for the business operation. As a company taking an active part in solving the challenges of society will generate higher productivity through better conditions for the internal client that leads to a better talent retention, and as a result, lower turnover rates, customer loyalty by providing a place where they can express their needs and file their complaints. In addition to quality and price, customers are starting to demand information about production conditions and product certifications, among others. Market access, yes, thanks to the compliance with standards and certifications required by external stakeholders, including consumers. And credibility, the company that are respectful towards people, communities, environments, and society in general, acquire a reputation that guarantees greater sustainability over time, thus reducing risk and anticipating situations that may affect them. This gives them greater agility to act and adapt, which creates greater confidence. Being environmentally responsible will be achieved if the company provides society with transparent information related to its practices and management, and if it responds to expectations that society has. This is important as adapting to the market and to the needs of the different stakeholders. Now we look at the history and evolution of the concept. The whole concept, as we know it today, is relatively new. It appeared to be first time in the academic world in 1953. Howard Bowen mentioned it for the first time and brings up responsibilities towards society that employers should bear. Under that approach, Bowen meant to point out that companies' daily activities had an impact on society, which may make it necessary to establish a series of business policies aimed at the values and objectives of society. However, it is interesting to make a greater leap in time and see that throughout history there have been cases and situations in which companies and corporations have been concerned about their employees and their community. The background of what we know today as CSR goes back several centuries, almost to the origins of organizations that combine capital and the work of to generate profit. However, it is important to point out that over the years, human rights, labor, and environmental abuses have been significant. We all know that about the exploitation of the working class during the Industrial Revolution. If we look further back, we see how slavery was the basis for the economy of the modern society without being questioned by some of the main and most important philosophers of that time, such as Aristotle. He questioned the existence of friendship between master and slave in his work. However, it is a situation like those mentioned in which business and social leaders acting freely and voluntarily to change things emerge. Although there have been cases of great abuse, it is important to mention some entrepreneurs who have been concerned in their employees' welfare and environment. One of the entrepreneurs who played an important role in the promotion of what we know as CSR is Robert Owen. In Victoria, England, and during the Industrial Revolution, he showed that production can be efficient and responsible toward workers and the environment at the same time. In 1820, Owen, who began working as an assistant in a cloth factory, created the new Lanark, an important company town. Which has now been declared as a World Heritage Site. In this community, cooperation and mutual support prevailed. Owen introduced several welfare measures, including public health and education, in order to eradicate child labor and the poor existing working conditions. It's also important to mention Whitbread and Truman in England, large brewers, Lloyd and Darby, working in the steel, Cadbury in the food sector, who brought land close to their factory to build a new town called Bourneville. Player in the tobacco industry, and Will in cotton, who preferred to stay and invest in the development of Bristol, their hometowns. In Spain, we find several significant examples during the 19th century, such as the emergence of the cooperative movement in the agricultural sector, consumer cooperatives, textile company towns in river basins, etc. One of the most important company towns built during this time was Colonia Güell in Santa Coloma in the Cervelló, Barcelona, currently an important architectural heritage that demonstrates the living conditions of workers and their families with school and health and places for leisure, reflecting the division of protection and responsibility of the entrepreneur of that time. When it comes to the United States, we should emphasize the concern that many entrepreneurs have for education. Many of the large private and prestigious universities such as Harvard, Yale, Cornell, Princeton, Duke, and Columbia, among others, were founded thanks to the financial contributions of the most prominent entrepreneurs at the time. Many of them also collaborated in the creation of important cultural centers, such as the Metropolitan Museum or the Metropolitan Opera House in New York. However, it is important to point out that these collaborations were only donations of important amounts of money for prestigious projects for great public impact. It gave them a good name. In most cases, though, it was detrimental to the neediest local sectors. It was not until the mid-50s that the United States went from conceiving CSR as a principle of charity based on philanthropic actions of big businessmen to conceiving CSR as a principle of management in which social action are integrated into the business strategies. Regarding the academic field, and as we said at the beginning of the section, the concept of CSR was used for the first time in 1953 by Howard Bowen. Later in 1960, Davis Keyes, who theorized on the subject, suggested that the responsibility companies have towards society and environment should be in line with the impact and power that these companies have over society. Unlike Owen and Davis, Milton Friedman, Nobel Prize in Economics, clearly objects to companies being socially responsible for the environment, since he believes that the only responsibility that business managers should have is to generate wealth and profit. In the 1970s, the same author called companies that allocated part of their profits to donations or to investment of activities that were not strictly linked to the business as irresponsible. This generated a link between CSR and philanthropy, since the second is intimately linked to donations. In this way, we can see that both on a practical level and in an academic level, there is a debate between the two positions. For the first position of a wide responsibility, and the second one that focuses only on the economic benefits of the shareholders. Linked to this, and in order to give a solution to those two different and opposing positions, in 1971, Johnson established 4 visions of the concept that can complement each other in practice and equally focus on obtaining economic benefits and implementing socially responsible actions. Vision 1 is the knowledge of the environment of the company's activity. Vision 2 is the implementation of social programs to obtain greater profits. Vision 3, the main interest of the company is to obtain benefits, whether economic or social. And Vision 4, the knowledge of the stakeholders and relations with them to gain wealth. During the 70s, once the vision and the concept of CSR was defined, the authors and businessmen who were concerned about this responsibility focused their studies on identifying how CSR should be carried out to obtain both economic and social benefit. Now we have a chart here: mandatory stage, political stage, and socially responsible stage. Mandatory stage, marketing and existing regulations; the political stage, social pressure and improving relations; and then anticipating and preventing social impact is the socially responsible stage. Seth, in 1975, talks about these 3 stages. The first stage is represented by all those actions that a company must take, either because they are established by law or because of the functioning of the market that they work in. Second is the political stage, referring to all the pressures and demands of society towards a company in order to improve relations. And the third stage, called socially responsible, is concerned with the ability of the company to anticipate and prevent the impact that its activities may have. The actions here are free and voluntary, and depend on the ethics of each company and organization. Linked to this, Carroll created a model focusing on corporate socially responsible performance made up of 4 interrelated categories: the economic, legal, the ethical, and philanthropic. Economic focuses on the generation of profit; the legal, complying with the current regulations and government business activities; the ethical, carrying on activities based on values and moral principles and exercising them voluntarily; and philanthropic, under the discretion of each company according to the environment on which it is located. Following this logic, in 1984, Drucker states that to achieve an implementation of socially responsible programming in a company, it is necessary for these companies to turn these social responsibilities into business opportunities so as to obtain economic benefit, but to also generate skills, competencies, better paid jobs, and opportunities for the whole society to access health services. Thanks to this idea of an interest in establishing a connection between financial performance and CSR arose, so that during the second half of the 80s, interest in this field was focused on socially responsible performance on the basis of 3 dimensions that Carroll proposed in 1979. These are corporate social responsibility, social problems, and corporate social actions. In 1984 also, Ullman, Cochrane, and Wood came up with the idea of bringing a degree of regulation to the CSR, which must be implemented through generation of principles that define a company's performance, the implementation of policies that seek to respond to social problems, and creation of processes that aim to generate social actions. As this resulted in the creation of written principles and norms in which we know what we know today as codes of conduct or ethical codes. From that time forward, we can see that there's a real effort to link some of the theoretical elements through the creation of models with the practice that's carried out in the companies and with the performance of each organization. This results in the construction of CSR indicators gaining strength during the 21st century with the creation of institutions and organizations geared to this purpose. Business ethics. Corporate social responsibility implies a company or organization to have total freedom when choosing which actions or policies to carry out based on the objectives they pursue. However, this freedom is determined by ethics, which will act as a guide in the decision making. Now we come to the definitions of ethics, the study of what is morally right and wrong, or a set of beliefs about what is morally right and wrong. And by contrast, the Spanish philosopher, in her work Company Ethics, defined it as a type of knowledge of those who seek to guide human actions in a rational sense. That is, it expects us to act rationally. Ethics is essentially being able to act rationally in life as a whole. Thus, both ethics and moral guidance are needed for companies and organizations to form their character based on the objectives and purposes they have, and also in terms of the audience they are directed to, their interests and their needs. The character will define the actions of the company, and the actions will end up becoming behavioral habits. These habits can be good or bad, and will be up to the company to decide how to act on the basis of law, but also on business ethics, since it should be noted that laws and ethics do not always go hand in hand. And in this respect, it should be underscored that some countries lack laws for regulating certain areas, such as child labor, exploitation of workers with endless workdays, and miserly wages, or disregard for human environmental pollution. It is in this context that ethics comes into play, assuming a series of guidelines and behaviors that are not set by law, but the company assumes as their responsibility. This way, we can state the CSR stands between imposed legality and freely accepted morality, since the CSR unites norms, actions, and values that a company or organization assumes voluntarily, but end up becoming regulatory standards within the organization itself. They are mandatory values for the company, but not for the rest. Here we have the intersection of the two. Mandatory ethics and somewhere in between those. Okay, regarding the ethical and moral nature of the company and organization may have, it is important to highlight that although today the SCRS is an inseparable part of these, it has not always been the case. And as we have seen, since there have been cases of unethical practices throughout history, and many authors have defended the amoral nature of companies. In that sense, we must emphasize the phenomenon of globalization, which may or may not help companies and organizations carry out socially responsible actions. Now, the Cambridge definition of that is the increase of trade around the world, especially by large companies producing and trading goods in many different countries. And this phenomenon opens the way for companies to relocate their production to other territories. They see this not only as a business opportunity, but also as a way to dodge the laws of certain current countries. Nowadays, globalization has overstretched the capacity of states to regulate their policies regarding respect for human, civil, political, economic, social, and ecological rights. Now, if the company feels suffocated by strict legislations, it can relocate its production to a territory which has more relaxed laws to attract new investment. This new international context leads to two totally separate, different divisions of that phenomena, one in support of globalization and economic rationality, and the other against globalization and defending social justice. Against what the ETNOR Foundation, the Ethics of Business Organization, stated, ethics is profitable. T. Levitt, one of the pioneering authors in defending globalization, states that the sole purpose of companies is to obtain economic profit. Benefits, and globalization is the solution, that state intervention in the economy and the markets, which often causes a setback in the business activity with its policies. Supporters of this vision affirm that the market itself that makes companies and organizations takes the high moral ground with no need for state intervention for its regulation, that being the basis of the economic theory. Milton Friedman made it clear in the 1970s, stating that the only social responsibility of a company is to make money. Regarding this ethical vision, the purely economic man is indeed close to being a social moron. That is what Amartya Sen calls defenders of globalism, considering as well that the distance between ethics and economy is one of the main factors that have led to the impoverishment of the economies for the last years. Business activity is affected every day by a wide range of externalities, which can be positive or negative. Considering these externalities, the interest of society for a market outcome goes beyond the well-being of the buyers and sellers of the market, since it also includes the welfare of others that may or may not be affected. Efficiency at the business level is not only measured in terms of profitability and economic benefit, but also several intangibles that will generate benefit in the long term, and they must be taken into account. The CSR helps a company to achieve the following: innovation, reputation, transparency, reliability, and fluent information, and an increasingly agile and productive communication between companies and their stakeholders. In addition to good communication, CSR will help to build a corporate reputation that will decisively influence the survival capacity of a company in today's voracious, competitive, and ruthless market. Corporate reputation is understood as the recognition of a company that stakeholders have based on its behavior towards society, the fulfillment of its commitments, and the satisfaction of the expectations of these stakeholders. Apart from economic interest, organizations have a social purpose. That means that the organization aims to provide society with goods and services that it demands or needs through certain corporate activities, economic, human capital, etc., on the basis of respect for human rights. A company is socially legitimate if these requirements are fulfilled. Otherwise, a company is delegitimized and lacks corporate reputation. To quote Adela Cortina, the delegitimated company have fewer resources to compete in the market. The following graph defines Adela Cortina's statement very well. Economic vision. If a company is only dedicated to gaining profits, it will be delegitimized in the long run, leading to a loss of resources to compete in the market, as well as a loss with its stakeholders. What economic, social, or human rights and labor and environmental vision, and that a company that not only is concerned about the economic benefits and implements a wide range of CSR policy to improve its reputation, will see how it will eventually win in the long run. In this part, as we said in previous sections, it is important to make a distinction between CSR and the concept of philanthropy, because although they are similar, they are not the same. As we have seen in the United States, donations from important businessmen have always been very common for the creation of support of institutions, especially in the cultural field. Continuing with the thought on the link between strategic management and CSR, at the end of the 90s, these philanthropic donations were seen as a competitive advantage that gave society a good impression of the company, since such actions are intimately linked with charity. The result is the association of CSR with aspects of philanthropy rather than the responsibility of the firm towards society as a whole, thus generating two positions against the CSR. The first position carries out philanthropic actions with an interest in improving its image and positioning in the market. The second position provides a comprehensive view in which the social concerns expressed by the different interest groups are integrated into the aspects that make up the business activity, such as the business model, the strategies, the vision, and the goods and services offered, etc. And in addition, and in response to social concerns, the socially responsible company promotes the creation of synergies with different social actors from different segments where interest is focused on positively impacting the welfare of the entire society. The implementation of this comprehensive social responsibility requires a paradigm shift in which the way of thinking and acting, which is what differentiates it from philanthropy. The paradigm shift translates into donations go to social investment. The impact not only falls on specific assets, but also seeks to generate social processes in favor of social welfare. It goes from a partial vision of reality to a comprehensive one. The reactive position becomes a proactive attitude of solidarity. The scattered intermittent actions become permanent social programs. It goes from specific donations without commitment to a creation of a cooperative funds. And there is no longer room for informality and non-transparency, and the company must be transparent and communicate with its public. It goes from improvised action to a professionalism in the activities aligned with the core of the activities carried out by the company. Now we come to the perspectives of CSR. As we have seen in the previous points, one of the main dilemmas concerning CSR is if, on the one hand, the company should focus only on its economic benefit that it can obtain performing its activities as the Dodger brothers and the shareholders of Henry Ford did, or if, as the latter claimed, it was necessary to invest the profits of the company into development of factories and, as a consequence, in the improvement of the welfare of the workers. Another point of disagreement is the one defended by Levitt in 1958 and Friedman in 1970. Their criticism is based on the individualistic conception of CSR. For both, investing in CSR will cause more profits than losses at the economic level, defending also that it is not the responsibility of the company to worry about social and economic environmental issues. Against these views, Carroll proposes a reconciliation between the vision of Friedman and Levitt. He argues that the only responsibility of a company is to make money, but defends an ethical responsibility to society and environment on the part of the company. Carroll theorizes about 4 levels of CSR. The first responsibility is economic, since the company has to fulfill its function of producing goods and services as well as generating profit. In addition, it must operate within a legal framework. It must reflect local ethical standards. And finally, it must provide discretionary resources from its operations once the 3 previous responsibilities have been fulfilled. This means that the company will work freely and according to its own criteria, complying with the 3 previous responsibilities. The conciliation results of the analysis of Burrell and Morgan, who speak for 4 approaches or perspectives of corporate social responsibility to present the relationship established between business and society. That is to say, a functionalist approach focuses on the regulation of the relationship between the company and society, a social-political approach that exposes the relationships of power and the logic of the power that it presents between the company and the society, a culturalist approach which emphasizes sharing values and social standards between business and society, and a constructivist approach that aims at to account for reciprocal construction of the company to society and society to the company. Here we have the 4 views. Right, this is more regulation, this is more towards change. It's so subjective, and this is goal-oriented. Functionalist approach focuses on the regulation of the relationship between the company and the society. That's why it's towards regulation. Social-political approach exposes the relationship of power and logic of power that it presents between the company and society. Still talking about towards regulation, but it's somewhat subjective, and so on. Let's look at the functionalist approach really as a social regulator. First approach is characterized by designing a company and society as two systems that pursue specific purposes and that use each other to achieve this purpose. The Bronze Law of CSR establishes that this regulation is achieved thanks to the control that society has over the business, known in theory as the implicit social contact that it brings companies into contact with the societies that surround them. According to this perspective, CSR is defined as an instrument of regulation of the company-society relationships that has the function of stabilizing such relationships and integrating the purpose of the company with those of society. Then we come to social approach, a CSR related to power. The second vision focuses on the power relation and the logic of conflict that acts as in the relationship between the company and society. Companies are conceived as a political arena where resources depending on relationships, sometimes conflicting with external groups. Following this perspective, CSR is defined as the expression of the power relations as it translates the capacity of social actors, organizations, non-governmental organizations, activists, government, etc., to influence the company and make them take advantage of their social, take into account, at least if not take advantage, of their social, ethical, and environmental claims. Then we come to the culturalist approach. CSR is a culture product. This approach perceives the relationship between the company and the society as an area of diffusion and exchange of representations, standards, and values. Companies are seen as a cultural place that is directly linked to the cultural system that has constituted the society. The degree of openness of the company to its societal, cultural environment will determine its capacity to take into account the values and social standards dominant in its management. In this case, CSR is defined as a cultural product that reflects the relations between this business and society as defined by the cultural, political institutions and social environment. Now we come to the constructionist approach. Yes, indeed we do. CSR as a socio-cognitive structure. The last vision recognizes the subjective and socially constructed nature of the relationship between business and society. It is an area where both entities interact, are both built and permanently configured. Following the image proposed by Morgan, this perspective can be characterized by a metaphor of two interacting brains. In this case, CSR is defined as socially responsibility and socio-cognitive construction of the business and society sphere through the complex process of reciprocal framing of intensities, values, and social issues.